Welcome to TE 804. I'm using the I'm going to be using the PowerPoint. I'm going to have you look at the PowerPoint called What is Culture? I'm going to put it on the page. And this is a video that accompanies it. It won't be synchronized with it, but I just want to hit the high points and kind of introduce you so you can see me in all my glory. I've been teaching multicultural education for a long time, probably getting a little set in my ways. And I really enjoy reading and working with other cultures and dealing with students from other cultures. I've always had that affinity. I don't know what your plans are, what I know you need this class as a basic requirement. I hope I can give you some things that are going to make it useful to you and give you some ideas for your own classes. First of all, the term culture. The term culture is so ambiguous and so big that it means almost nothing. Mainly because when we use it, we don't know what the other person might mean by it. A lot of times when you say someone is cultured, unless they're in a clam or something, we're making a pearl. Pearls are cultured, What in fact we're dealing with is some kind of perception that there's a high culture, that it's people in tuxedos at operas and people at a New York dinner party with very sophisticated language and fancy liquor drinks and something that's just over our head. So we tend to retreat from that, and it's called high culture, haute couture. It's interesting that we tend to get nervous about the term culture, when in fact it's everything that is that we think or believe. It's everything that our activities, whatever our activities are. If we're tanning hides of a cow for somebody, if we're making a cake, if we're running in a marathon, if we're simply sitting at a desk reading a book, these are all activities. That's 1/3 of the definition of culture. So you've got what people believe, what they do or make, and then you've got the objects that they make, whether it's a pyramid or a crossbow or a pencil or a pen or a can, like a can of soda. This is the definition of culture. It can go as low or as high. There is no gear shift in it. There's not a low culture and a high culture. It's all just bias and perceptions of what is best or what is not. So when you see those terms, a lot of times people, they get a little paranoid about it. Culture is not innate. You're not born and then you come with culture. You have to learn the whole thing. You've heard these weird stories in psychology books about children they call them feral children. They grew up with the wolves or something, like Romulus and Remus, who were the two brothers that mythically founded the city of Rome in 700 BC. They were raised by a she-wolf. There's actually a statue in Rome, and they're actually drinking the milk of the she-wolf. She's their mother. Two little fat boys in there. That means the Romans were from the wolf, from the brutality and the cleverness and the ferocity and the warrior culture of the wolf. A lot of people identify, what if they'd been founded by cows or something? The bovine culture. I don't think it would have scared people. Cultures, I've got a little thing in here and I just mentioned it. Culture's not high or low. It's not the opera. It mainly can be perceived this way, There's subjective culture and objective culture. And objective culture is the objects in the culture. It's the music. It's the microphones. It's the paintings. It's the art that people make. It's if you're a farmer, it's a tractor. It's a hay bale that you made. All these things are objective culture. They exist. Most of us can, without getting too weirdly philosophical, yes, it exists, and we can all agree that there it is, and it's probably a certain color. We can agree on the color. But there's a thing called subjective culture, and subjective is the deep culture. If I take a term like childhood, and I ask all of you to do this, I've asked you to do a culture map, and you're going to see different things on that culture map. And by the way, you have to do the culture map and do all your writing without seeing anybody else's stuff, because I don't want you to be influenced by it. They're saying, well, I'll go last. That way I'll kind of copy the last idea I see. Because I want it to be pure. I want it to be something from you. I want it to be your perception. I don't want you to worry about it being artistic. I'm not artistic. But when you do your culture map, that's basically, it may have objective things, but the arrangement and how you do it's going to be subjective. So we take a term like childhood, and you do your childhood home, you're going to have places that are important to you because you have emotional connections to them. And then you're going to have things that have deep meaning to you. I think I have a list in here someplace. I put in some rather controversial terms. One of them was Trumper, and one was snowflake, and Black Lives Matter. The controversial because there are different perceptions of them. You can say the term civil rights laws or voting rights. And some people will say, well, we don't have to worry about civil rights because racism's over with, or it's not very major deal. Other people say we haven't made any progress in 50 years. We have gone backwards, in fact. That's where subjective culture comes in, because the perception is so radically different. Okay? How you feel about school? Think about your first day, first day in first or second grade kindergarten. You got your I remember having a little pencil box and the brand new crayons. And I remember smelling the crayons. And I'm kind of depressed because the crayons don't smell like they used 2 years ago. Not that I was addicted to sniffing them, but they make them different. They have just a different odor. They're not as waxy to me. And I remember I loved the smell of the crayons and the pencils, the brand new pencils, and sharpening my pencil and getting to go up and sharpen your pencil. It was a little activity, and it was very exciting. And I saw school as something I loved. Most of you in education, you don't see school as a pain in the rear end. You actually are excited about it. You like to teach. You like to have those kids come in. You may hate tests and have a very subjective reaction in a negative way to standardized tests and things like that, but you like the idea of interacting with kids. And you like to be the teacher. You've always wanted to be the teacher. You used to make your dolls or your bears or your little dogs or whatever you had, or your little sister and brother. You used to force them to sit there, and you taught them, So teaching has a very subjective set of terms with it. Objectively, yes, this person's over there, they're teaching, but what's going on is not the same. To all of us, it's different. Objective culture, I mentioned, that's the artifacts, the things. Everything you see behind me is objective culture. That Audrey Hepburn, Moon River behind me. If you can see it there, I'll push it up. Okay. And I've got that green thing in front of the TV over here. Those are 1980s little video games that you used to buy. Now they're popular again. Sure, they're not as nice as Call of Duty and stuff like that, but they were fun. You could play with them, play football or baseball or something. I got the baseball one. It's one I liked. Everything you see in here, the fan, everything's an artifact. It's created by man. It's part of culture. The language I use is culture. It's dictated by, historical events. Changed it. I have a couple of little bubble things that have like different cultures in the United States. We like to think of this, some people say, a melting pot. All Americans are melting down into a same culture. But we know that's not true. We know there's segregation. We know for whatever reason there's segregation, good or bad. But we know that some groups stay together. We know that early on in the Midwest, the Swedes and the Danes and the Germans had their own communities. Now, if you're from Nebraska, and there's no reason to think you are, because you could be from anywhere. I know most of you may be. But you know that like Oakland, Nebraska was a Swedish town. And Dannenbrog, over by north of Grand Island, or kind of in that way, that was a Danish town. They still serve Danish food over there. We know that Wilbur was Czech. You can get kolaches down there. Forgive me if I said it incorrectly. But we got new. I'm from Lexington, Nebraska. We went from 0%, almost one person literally Hispanic, or one family, 25 years ago or more, 30 years ago. Now it's 67% Hispanic, and that's El Salvadoran, Honduran, a lot of Mexicans, but a lot of Guatemalans. Okay. Some people even from Ecuador and the Caribbean. Puerto Ricans have a totally different, they're part of the United States. They're Puerto Rico. And so our town, and now we've gotten refugees from Somalia. And so we have Somali refugees. They're Muslims. And the women dress with the hijab and the traditional covering. And so I go to Walmart when I go shopping for our daycare. We have a daycare. And I see people dressed in all kinds of ways. I see Sikh, the guys that wear the turbans on their head. Okay, turban, Turban. Those guys are Sikhs from India. They're not Muslims. People don't know what they are. And they're truck drivers. And I found out that there's Taste of India, a little restaurant over by Overton on the interstate. And this restaurant, Taste of India, is actually, I think they have food from Kashmir in India. And a lot of truck drivers, which I didn't know this, a lot of truck drivers from Canada are Sikhs. And they love to eat the food at the restaurant called A Taste of India. I think it was what it is called. In this little restaurant over there in this truck stop. And people from Canada are stopping there all the time. Or people that like Indian food or Kashmiri food. There's diversity there I couldn't even imagine. It was just popped up. I had no idea. So we're a country that's constantly in a flux of change. A lot of people don't like that. You're from communities, some of you, where there's conflict. You know the stuff about the wall. You may have heard of a politician with orange hair. I'm not going to go into politics here. It'll come up occasionally. But you know that there's controversy, and you face it when you have children. Maybe their parents are not here with documents. I always use the term without documents. I don't say illegal aliens. I think it makes a big difference. I always tell people the alien is that guy, is that creature on that science fiction show that clings to your face and then hatches out of your stomach a new baby. It tears your guts out. That's the alien, okay? Alien is a very negative term. Alien is somebody in a spaceship that comes down. We're talking real alien. But my other little bubble I created about U.S. culture today kind of has the bubbles not intersecting as much or overlapping. And I've added things like the Arab Americans. Large number of Arab Americans in the United States are Muslim Americans. But you can't say Muslims are all Arabs because a lot of them are African. Lexington's got several hundred Somali Muslims. and they are not Arabs, but some of them may speak Arabic, but some may not. They have other languages. So you can't just say there's one language. Asian Americans, that includes people from India. I mentioned Sikhs, Sikh, I think is how you spell that. Their religion is not Islam and not Hinduism. It's another religion that formed between those religions. But I can't say it's a mix of those religions. So all I'll say is you need to look it up, because I'm not going to claim to be an expert on that. Native Americans are still here. What happened to their country? What about all the immigrants that came to their country? You know, I also have refugees on there, because refugees are a major group now. And you can't just go. And the book that I'm having you read, Mary Pipher, In the Middle of Everywhere, is about refugees settling in the town of Lincoln, Nebraska. So if you're from Nebraska, we're talking Lincoln, Nebraska. But we're not talking undocumented people. These are all legal refugees that were allowed in the United States, and they come from everywhere, from Afghanistan, from the Middle East, from Southeast Asian countries, okay? There's a large group in Nebraska called I call them Karen. I may be making mistakes. Spelled just like the girl's name, Karen. You don't hear that name much anymore, but it's very traditional. And Karen is a group of minority group people from the country of Myanmar, or used to be called Siam or Burma, and now it's called Myanmar, and there's a lot of political problems. They're persecuted there. A lot of them live in camps in Thailand. They are the second most common non-English speaker in Nebraska after Spanish speakers. And there's several thousand of them in Nebraska. And so I know nothing about them. So I'd like you to think about this class as learning how to find research and how to find out information, not only how to deal with and promote intercultural understanding, but to provide your students a structure and a framework for finding out about other cultures, because it's going to continue to change. And in this class, I mentioned a few more things. I have a little bit about American culture and how it's changed, and some terms. I put some new terms on here on my frame. Looks like frame number 10 or something like that. Excuse me. I have some terms. I've got trumpers. I've got snowflakes, the cloud, B.O.B., liberal bigot, build the wall. You know some of these terms. Some of them you have to look them up. It's a thing called Urban Dictionary. I tried to not pick it very super offensive ones, because I could easily do that. I don't want to have people screaming, well, you're teaching really nasty words. And unfortunately, people aren't very tolerant of people, and they use them. So sometimes it pays to know bad language, because you have to recognize when it's used that it's a very serious issue. But in this class, as I mentioned, a couple of things. The second time I recorded this, because the first time the audio was terrible. I could not believe it. This is your first book. The other book, In the Middle of Everywhere by Mary Pipher, is a book that I want you to read it like a pleasure reading. Just read it by the end of the class. The last Blackboard entry will deal with that. This book, I'm going to have you read the first 2 chapters this week, July up to about July 8th or whatever. And I'm going to be doing a more talk about the first 2 chapters on video. I have some old videos covering the same stuff, but I kind of like making new stuff, because there's nothing worse than me talking about last year saying, oh, Trump's never going to get nomination. This is going to happen. I don't even want to go into that. So I'm going to talk about some concepts and it talks, the book's Teaching Strategies for Ethnic Studies. I use it because I love it because it has whole chapters devoted that develops concepts of different cultures, Hispanic, Mexican, Jewish Americans. Now, one of your assignments is just kind of go into that later on in the class, not this week, and examine one of those groups and try to study and find out details, you know. So maybe you're from some place where there are a lot of Puerto Ricans, or you want to know differences between Puerto Ricans and Mexican Americans. Lots. Don't be a politician and think that all Hispanics are the same, all Asians are the same, all white people are the same. People are different. There's diversity within groups. And the assumption is a disaster. If you think you know something, you probably don't know very much about it. So I want you to read these. I'll be adding another maybe a video cast during the week. I'm going to be on YouTube. Hopefully this one's come off well, and I've given you some ideas about what culture is. I'm pretty excited about the projects because I've got you a couple of essays to write. They're not super long, but I do want them typed so I can work with them. And I want to get them back to you pretty fast, so within a couple of days. So I'm trying to work on that. But the main thing is I want to, your final project can actually be a game. I've got a couple of ideas. I call them wild card projects. So you have a lot of options there. Now, this week, I'm looking forward to looking at your culture maps. I would like you to put them up by Thursday with a lot of, you know, I've got on Blackboard what I want you to write about in terms of your map, because the map is a great way to get acquainted with the students in your class and to get people to learn more about their cultural background. I found that among people that think they have nothing that's not different, in other words, they think they got everything in common, they would often find when they do the culture maps, there are whole little aspects of culture they know nothing about. One time I remember one guy, he had all the Chinese restaurants and all the dirt track. He used to broadcast dirt track racing in western and southern Nebraska. And he always had to eat Chinese food while he's broadcasting the stock car races or whatever. And I know about stock car races, but I'm not really into that. It's a whole little culture to itself, just like being horse people. You know, I'm afraid of ponies and horses. I fell off one as a 5-year-old and I never got back on. And it was a Shetland pony, which is one of the most frightening animals I've ever met. But I don't mind snakes. I'll mess with snakes all day, but ponies scare me. So we're all different, right? Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this, and I hope this comes out better than the last one that didn't record very well.